Neon light flickered violently outside O'Rourke's diner, casting long shadows over Cassius Sterling's tailored overcoat. As the undisputed king of Boston's criminal underworld, his name usually commanded absolute, terrifying compliance. Yet, all his cultivated composure shattered the second he locked eyes with a bruised, exhausted busboy wiping down the sticky counter. It wasn't the kid's tragic, delicate features or his threadbare clothes that made the ruthless mafia boss freeze in his tracks. It was the heavy, custom-engraved silver medallion swinging from the boy's pale neck, the exact, one-of-a-kind family heirloom stolen the night Cassius's father was brutally murdered 15 years ago. Footsteps echoed heavily against the checkered linoleum floor of O'Rourke's diner, a 24-hour joint that smelled perpetually of burnt coffee and old grease. Cassius Sterling slid into a back booth, his tailored Tom Ford overcoat damp from the December storm. At 32, Cassius was the undisputed head of the Sterling Syndicate, a sprawling empire built on illegal importing, high-stakes gambling, and political extortion. His sharp jawline, piercing gray eyes, and the network of faint scars across his knuckles told the story of a man who had fought his way out of hell and crowned himself its king. He was here for a clandestine meeting with Richard Sullivan, a corrupt port commissioner, but Richard was late, irritated. Cassius drummed his fingers against the table, his gaze drifting lazily across the empty diner. That was when he saw him. The boy couldn't have been older than 22. He was aggressively wiping down the counter, his slender frame swallowed by an oversized, faded denim jacket. Dark, unruly hair fell over his forehead, masking eyes that looked too old, too tired for his youthful face. There was a purpling bruise blooming along his left cheekbone, a fresh cut on his lower lip. But what drew Cassius's attention wasn't the boy's tragic, delicate beauty. As the boy leaned over to scrub a stubborn stain, the top buttons of his flannel shirt parted. A heavy silver chain swung forward, catching the flickering fluorescent light overhead. Suspended from the chain was a thick silver coin deeply engraved with a crest, a roaring lion entangled with a serpent, with a tiny, flawless black diamond set into the lion's eye. Cassius stopped breathing. The ambient noise of the diner, the hum of the refrigerator, the rain lashing against the windows faded into a high-pitched ringing in his ears. The Sterling crest. It was impossible. There were only two in existence. Cassius wore one beneath his shirt, resting against his heart. The other had belonged to his late father, Arthur Sterling Sr., ripped from his neck the night the rival Callahan family had ambushed their home. Cassius had spent millions of dollars and countless hours torturing informants over the last decade, trying to track down the men who took it, the men who took his family. It was his white whale, and now it was hanging around the neck of a battered busboy in a cheap diner. Cassius stood up abruptly, the wooden booth groaning in protest. He crossed the diner in 4 long strides. The boy looked up, startled by the sudden imposing presence looming over him. Up close, the boy's eyes were a startling shade of amber, wide and fearful like a cornered deer. "We're closing soon, sir," the boy stammered, his voice raspy and soft. He took a reflexive step back, clutching the damp rag to his chest. Cassius didn't speak. His eyes were locked on the silver pendant. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out. The boy flinched, expecting a blow, but Cassius's large, calloused hand merely grasped the silver medallion. It was warm from the boy's skin. He rubbed his thumb over the black diamond. It was real. It was the necklace. "Where did you get this?" Cassius's voice was a dangerous, low rumble. It wasn't a question. It was a demand that promised violence if ignored. The boy slapped Cassius's hand away, a sudden flash of defensive fire in his amber eyes. "Don't touch me. Get away from me. I asked you a question." Cassius stepped closer, pinning the boy against the edge of the counter with his sheer physical presence. "Where the hell did you get that necklace?" "It's mine," the boy snapped, though his hands were trembling violently. "My mother gave it to me. Now back off before I scream for the manager." Cassius let out a dark, humorless chuckle. His mother. The lie was so blatant it almost enraged him further. "Your mother?" Cassius signaled to the front door. His right-hand man, a towering enforcer named Damien, stepped inside from the rain, flipping the open sign to closed and locking the deadbolt. The boy's face drained of color. He realized instantly that he was not dealing with a normal patron. He dropped the rag and tried to dart toward the kitchen doors, but Cassius was faster. He grabbed the boy by the collar of his jacket, spinning him around and slamming him firmly, but without brutal force, against the wall. "You're coming with me," Cassius whispered, his face inches from the boy's. "And if you lie to me again about where you got my father's necklace, I will dismantle your life piece by piece." The ride to the Sterling estate in Milton was suffocatingly quiet. The boy whose name Cassius learned from his crumpled diner name tag was Finn, sat rigidly in the back of the armored Maybach, flanked by Cassius and Damien. Finn was terrified, his amber eyes darting to the tinted windows, watching the city lights blur past as he was dragged further into an unknown nightmare. Cassius observed him in the dim light of the cabin. Finn didn't look like a thief, nor a killer. He looked like someone who had been chewed up and spat out by the world. His hands, resting on his lap, were red and raw from manual labor, his clothes threadbare. Yet, he possessed a quiet, stubborn defiance that fascinated Cassius. Most men wept or begged when shoved into the back of a Mafia boss's car. Finn just radiated silent, fearful hostility. The iron gates of the Sterling estate parted, revealing a sprawling, modern mansion isolated by acres of dense, private forest. Once inside, Cassius didn't take Finn to a dungeon or a basement. He led him into a massive, fire-lit study lined with leather-bound books and antique mahogany furniture. "Sit," Cassius commanded, pointing to a plush leather armchair. Finn remained standing, his arms crossed over his chest, shielding the necklace. "I want to go home. You can't just kidnap people." "I can do whatever I please, Finn," Cassius said, shedding his damp overcoat and tossing it over a chair. He walked to a crystal decanter and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. He offered none to the boy. "My name is Cassius Sterling. I highly doubt you know who I am, given your circumstances. But that necklace you're wearing belongs to my family. It was stolen 15 years ago, over the dead body of my father." Finn's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock piercing through his defensive exterior. "Dead body? I didn't know. Who gave it to you?" Cassius took a slow sip of the scotch, his gaze predatory. Finn bit his trembling lower lip. He looked around the opulent room, realizing the terrifying gravity of his situation. "I told you. My mother gave it to me. On her deathbed." Cassius slammed his glass down on the desk. The sharp crack made Finn jump. "Do not lie to me. My father was killed by the Callahan family. Unless your mother was a hitman for the Irish mob, you are lying." "I'm not," Finn shouted back, his voice cracking with emotion. "Her name was Sarah Hayes. She was a nurse at St. Jude's Hospital. She died of leukemia 3 years ago. She gave me this necklace before she passed. She said it was a token from someone she loved. She told me to keep it safe, to never sell it, no matter how hungry I got." Tears pricked the corners of Finn's eyes, but he wiped them away furiously, refusing to cry in front of his captor. "I've been living out of my car for 6 months. I could have pawned it 100 times to pay for a warm bed, but I didn't, because it was hers. So if you think I stole it, you're crazy." Cassius froze. Sarah Hayes. The name hit him like a physical blow. He stared at Finn, truly looking at him for the first time. The boy's features, beneath the dirt and the bruises, there was a familiarity that made Cassius's blood run cold. "Sarah Hayes," Cassius repeated, his voice suddenly hollow. He walked slowly around the desk, closing the distance between them. "How old are you, Finn?" 21, Finn whispered, backing away until his legs hit the edge of the armchair. 21. 15 years ago, Finn would have been 6 years old. Cassius's mind raced, piecing together fragments of a past he had tried to bury. His father, Arthur, was a ruthless man, but he had secrets. Whispers in the syndicate suggested Arthur had a mistress, a civilian woman he kept hidden from the violent world of the Mafia. A nurse who had treated him for a gunshot wound long before Cassius took over. "Take off your jacket," Cassius ordered softly, the anger entirely gone from his voice, replaced by a haunting urgency. Finn clutched his collar. "No. Please. Finn, I swear to God I will not hurt you. Just take off the jacket." Hesitantly, trembling, Finn slipped the oversized denim jacket off his shoulders. The thin flannel shirt he wore beneath it was too small. Riding up slightly, Cassius reached out, his fingers brushing against Finn's neck. Finn flinched violently, but Cassius only unclasped the heavy silver necklace. He held it in his palm, comparing it to his own. Then, Cassius looked at Finn's exposed left forearm. There, just below the elbow, was a birthmark, a distinct, jagged shape that looked like a crescent moon. Cassius felt the floor drop out from beneath him. His breathing hitched. He had the exact same birthmark on his right shoulder. It was a genetic quirk passed down through the Sterling bloodline for 3 generations. You, Cassius breathed out, stepping back as if the boy were made of fire. Sarah Hayes wasn't a hitman. She was my father's mistress. Finn stared at him, bewildered and terrified. What are you talking about? The night my father was killed, Cassius said, his voice a hoarse whisper. He wasn't at the family estate. He was ambushed across town. We never knew why he was in that neighborhood without his guards. Cassius looked at the necklace, the missing puzzle piece finally snapping into place. He was visiting her. He was visiting you. Finn shook his head frantically. No. My dad died in a car crash before I was born, my mom told me. Your mother lied to protect you, Cassius said, the immense weight of the revelation crashing down on him. He looked at the poor, bruised boy shivering in his study. This boy wasn't a thief. He wasn't an enemy. He was Cassius's half-brother. The revelation shifted the entire dynamic of the room. The oppressive, terrifying atmosphere gave way to a heavy, stunned silence. Cassius poured another glass of scotch, downing it in one swift motion to steady the sudden trembling in his hands. He was a mafia boss. He dealt in bullets, blood, and betrayal. He was not equipped to handle a long-lost, impoverished brother materializing in a diner. Sit down, Finn, Cassius said, and this time it was a gentle request, not a command. Finn collapsed into the armchair, his legs seemingly giving out. He looked at the silver medallion now resting on Cassius's mahogany desk, then at the towering, terrifying man who claimed they shared blood. This is insane. You're lying. You just want the necklace. If I just wanted the necklace, you'd be at the bottom of the Charles River right now, Cassius stated bluntly, the brutal reality of his world slipping out. Finn flinched. Cassius sighed, rubbing his temples. I apologize. I'm not used to gentleness. Cassius walked over to a heavy iron safe embedded in the wall behind a painting. He spun the dial, unlocked it, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger and a stack of old photographs. He tossed them onto the desk in front of Finn. Look, Cassius instructed. Finn hesitantly leaned forward. The photographs were old, slightly faded. They showed a younger version of Cassius's father, a man with the same sharp jaw and imposing presence. In a few of the covertly taken surveillance photos, Arthur Sterling Sr. was seen walking into a modest apartment building in South Boston. In one blurry shot, he was holding the door for a smiling woman with bright, amber eyes. That's... Finn choked on a sob, his fingers tracing the woman's face. That's my mother. My father's right-hand man, an old rat named Silas, kept tabs on everyone, even his own boss. He took these photos for leverage, Cassius explained, his tone darkening. I found them after I took over the syndicate and put a bullet in Silas's head for betrayal, but I never knew the woman's name. I never knew she had a child. Finn stared at the photos, his entire reality unspooling. If he was my father, why did he never help us? We were so poor. My mom worked double shifts just to keep the heat on, and then when she got sick, Finn's voice broke. We had nothing. Cassius felt a strange, foreign ache in his chest guilt. Not his own, but his father's. My world is a violent one, Finn. The Callahan family, our rivals, would have slaughtered you and your mother in a heartbeat if they knew you existed. My father gave her that necklace as a promise, maybe, but he stayed away to keep you alive. And in the end, it was his visit to your neighborhood that got him killed. They tracked him there. Finn buried his face in his hands, quiet sobs racking his frail body. The trauma of the street, the grief for his mother, and the shocking upheaval of his identity were too much. Cassius watched him, an intense, unfamiliar protective instinct flaring to life. He had spent his life protecting his empire, his territory, his wealth. But this boy was blood, the last remaining family Cassius had in the world, and someone had put those bruises on his face. Cassius walked over and knelt in front of the armchair, putting him at eye level with the weeping boy. Finn, look at me. Finn sniffled, lowering his hands. His amber eyes were red and swollen. Who hit you? Cassius asked, his voice deadly calm. It was the voice of the Sterling Syndicate boss, the apex predator of Boston's underworld. Finn shrank back slightly. It doesn't matter. It's just a guy from the shelter. I owed him some money for a spot near the heater. It matters, Cassius corrected him softly. You are a Sterling. Half-blood or not, you carry the crest. No one touches what belongs to my family. Before Finn could protest, the heavy oak doors of the study burst open. Damien stood in the doorway, his face pale and tense, an expression Cassius had rarely seen on his enforcer. Boss, Damien interrupted, his voice tight. We have a problem. The diner. The one we just left. Cassius stood up, his protective demeanor instantly morphing into cold authority. What about it? It just went up in flames, Damien said, glancing nervously at Finn. A drive-by firebombing. Witnesses said it was a black SUV. Callahan colors. Cassius's blood ran ice cold. He looked down at the silver necklace on the desk. The Callahans hadn't attacked the diner randomly. They had been tracking the necklace. Or, worse, they had been tracking Finn. They know, Cassius realized aloud, a chilling dread washing over him. The secret his father had died to protect was out. The Irish mob knew about the illegitimate heir. Lock down the estate, Cassius barked at Damien. Double the perimeter guard. Nobody gets in or out. As Damien rushed off to execute the orders, Cassius turned back to Finn. The boy was staring at him in absolute terror, realizing that the miserable, impoverished life he had known was gone forever, replaced by something infinitely more dangerous. Welcome to the family, little brother, Cassius said grimly, reaching down to unholster the sleek black Glock from his shoulder holster. Now, we have a war to win. Absolute chaos consumed the sprawling grounds of the Milton estate the moment Damien issued the extreme lockdown protocol over the encrypted comms network. Rain lashed violently against the reinforced, bulletproof glass of the mahogany study, mirroring the sudden, violent storm that had just swallowed Cassius Sterling's carefully controlled life. Outside the window, heavily armed guards in black tactical gear flooded the manicured lawns, their high-beam flashlights piercing the dense, freezing Boston fog as they secured the perimeter. Cassius stood by the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit, watching his private sanctuary transform into an impenetrable military compound. He took a slow, deep breath, forcing the ruthless, calculating Mafia boss back to the surface. He turned away from the glass to look at the boy sitting motionless in the oversized leather armchair. You told me your name was Finn, Cassius stated. His voice was calm, but his sharp, slate-gray eyes missed nothing, not the way the boy's hands shook, nor the defensive way he clutched the faded denim jacket around his dangerously thin frame. The boy swallowed hard, his amber eyes darting nervously toward the heavy oak doors as the muffled sounds of shouting guards echoed from the hallway. He looked impossibly small in the grand, opulent room. It's an alias, he admitted, his voice barely a raspy whisper. I owed money to some bad people in Southie, a bookie who likes to use baseball bats on people who miss payments. My real name is Liam. Liam Hayes. Cassius nodded slowly, testing the name on his tongue. Liam. It suited him far better than the street moshigger. It stripped away the desperate, hunted persona and left behind something real, something connected to the woman Arthur Sterling had loved in secret. All right, Liam, Cassius said, stepping closer to the fire burning steadily in the hearth. From this exact moment forward, you do not leave this house. The Callahans know you exist now. That firebombing at the diner wasn't a warning. It was an execution attempt. Declan Callahan, the man who murdered our father, is a rabid dog. He will not stop hunting until you are in the ground, and he will burn half of Boston to find you. Before Liam could fully process the terrifying, suffocating gravity of that threat, the heavy oak doors of the study swung open. A woman strode into the room, bringing an entirely different, crackling kind of electricity into the dark, oppressive atmosphere. Audrey Sinclair was a paradox in the hyper-violent, hyper-masculine world of the Sterling Syndicate. She was a brilliant, disgraced trauma surgeon who had lost her prestigious hospital privileges after saving a notorious mobster off the books to pay for her younger sister's crippling medical debts. Now, she was Cassius's highly paid personal physician, and the only person in the entire state of Massachusetts who dared to look the Mafia boss in the eye without a flicker of fear. Her raven hair was pulled back into a messy, utilitarian bun, and her sharp emerald eyes assessed the room in a fraction of a second. Damien told me we had a massive breach protocol, Audrey said, her voice crisp, authoritative, and completely ignoring Cassius's intimidating, brooding presence. She walked straight past the syndicate leader and headed directly for Liam. The faint, comforting scent of vanilla and sterile rubbing alcohol followed in her wake. Her professional gaze swept clinically over the young man, immediately cataloging the dark, purpling bruise blooming along his left cheekbone and the fresh, jagged split on his lower lip. "Who did this to him?" she demanded, her tone sharpening with protective maternal instinct. "Collateral damage from his previous life on the streets," Cassius replied from the fireplace, his tone softening imperceptibly as he watched her work. There was a constant, unspoken tension between them, a dangerous, simmering attraction that Cassius violently suppressed. Loving someone in his brutal world was a guaranteed death sentence, a glowing vulnerability his enemies would ruthlessly exploit. Audrey gently tilted Liam's chin upward with 2 fingers, inspecting the swelling around his orbital bone. "You're going to need ice, young man, and probably a strict concussion protocol for the next 24 hours. Your pupils are slightly sluggish. I'm Dr. Sinclair." "He is my brother, Audrey," Cassius declared quietly, the heavy words dropping into the room like lead weights. Audrey's hands froze midair. She stopped breathing for a second. Slowly, she turned her head, looking from Liam's striking amber eyes to Cassius's hardened, stoic face. Her brilliant mind rapidly snapped the impossible pieces together. She knew the bloody, tragic history of the Sterling family better than anyone in the inner circle. She knew about the missing necklace. "Arthur's missing piece," she whispered, her emerald eyes widening in profound shock. The rumor was true. "Exactly," Cassius confirmed, his jaw clenching tight. "And the Callahans just drive-by firebombed the diner he was working at 20 minutes ago. Declan knows the secret. He's actively trying to wipe the board clean before Liam can even comprehend his bloodline, let alone claim any inheritance or power." Audrey immediately shifted her posture, moving into a protective stance that placed her body squarely between Liam and Cassius. Her medical detachment vanished, replaced by fierce, urgent alarm. "Then you need to hide him right now, Cassius. Put him on the private jet and send him to the safe house in the Swiss Alps. If Declan Callahan is making aggressive moves against a civilian, Boston is going to burn to the ground tonight." "No," Liam interrupted. The single word wasn't shouted, but it carried a surprising, resonant strength. Liam slowly pushed himself up from the deep leather chair, ignoring Audrey's gentle hand trying to keep him seated. His legs were shaking, and his face was pale, but his jaw was set with a stubborn, reckless determination. "I'm not running," Liam said, his voice steadily gaining volume. He looked past Audrey, locking his amber eyes directly on Cassius. "I've been running my entire miserable life, from debt collectors, from eviction notices, from poverty, from guys with switchblades in dark alleys. I'm so damn tired of running. If this Declan guy killed my father, if he wants me dead just for existing, I want to know why. I want to stay here. I want to fight back." Cassius felt a sudden, massive surge of unexpected, fierce pride swell in his chest. The kid looked like a stiff breeze could knock him over, but he had the undeniable sterling iron running hot in his veins. He wasn't prey. Cassius stepped away from the fire, closing the distance between them. He stopped right beside Audrey, so close he could feel the radiating heat of her anger and fear. It intoxicated him, pulling violently at his rigid self-control. "He stays with me," Cassius stated, his voice a low, immovable rumble. "Here. It's the safest place on earth for him right now. But I need you to stay too. Audrey, I need you to live in this house and look after him while I go out and dismantle Declan Callahan's empire, brick by bloody brick." Audrey looked up at him, her chest heaving. Her emerald eyes flashed with a potent, agonizing mix of defiance and deep-seated, terrifying fear for the man she secretly, desperately loved. "You know exactly what this means, Cassius. You're going to start an all-out street war." "No," Cassius corrected her softly, his gray eyes darkening into a lethal, bottomless abyss. "I am going to end one." Rain continued to wash over the city as the night deepened, but inside the estate, plans were being forged in steel and fire. Cassius summoned his inner circle to the underground war room, a heavily fortified bunker beneath the mansion. The walls were lined with monitors displaying live feeds of Sterling territories across the state. Liam sat quietly in the corner, a bag of frozen peas pressed to his cheek, watching his estranged brother transform from a wealthy businessman into a terrifying warlord. Audrey sat beside Liam, her presence a grounding force in the room, packed with hardened killers. Declan Callahan has grown arrogant, Cassius addressed his lieutenants, his voice echoing in the cold concrete room. He thinks burning down a diner sends a message. We are going to send a louder one. Damien, I want the Callahans' illegal shipping ports in South Boston seized by dawn. Burn the contraband, sink the boats, but leave the men alive to tell Declan who did it. I want them to face the consequences of crossing us. Damien nodded, a grim, sadistic smile playing on his lips. Consider it done, boss. And the underground casino he operates in the West End? Asked Silas, a younger captain known for his ruthlessness. Raid it, Cassius ordered coldly. Take every dime from the vault and distribute it anonymously to the charities in our territory. Let the city know that while Declan Callahan burns businesses, the Sterlings build the community. We bleed him of his resources, his reputation, and his pride. I want him to suffer complete ruin before I take his life. Audrey watched Cassius command the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was a monster to the world, but to his people, he was a king. And to her, he was the man who had funded her underground clinic when the medical board abandoned her. As the lieutenants dispersed to execute their orders, Cassius walked over to Audrey and Liam. He pulled up a chair, his imposing frame dominating the small space. Tomorrow, we start your training, Cassius said, looking directly at Liam. If you are going to carry the Sterling name, you need to know how to defend it, hand-to-hand combat, firearms, evasion tactics. No one will ever put their hands on you again. Liam swallowed hard but nodded resolutely. I'm ready. I'll take him upstairs to rest, Audrey said softly, sensing the sheer physical exhaustion radiating from the young man. She helped Liam up and guided him out of the war room, leaving Cassius alone with his violent thoughts. An hour later, Cassius found Audrey in the mansion's massive, dimly lit kitchen, brewing a cup of chamomile tea. The fluorescent lights hummed quietly, a stark contrast to the violence brewing outside the bulletproof windows. He's asleep, Audrey said without turning around. He's terrified, Cassius, but he's incredibly brave. Cassius stepped behind her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body, but careful not to touch her. He reminds me of my father, stubborn, proud, a survivor. Audrey turned around, leaning back against the cold marble counter. She looked up at him, her professional defenses finally lowering to reveal the raw emotion underneath. And what about you? Are you terrified? Of Declan Callahan? Never. Cassius reached out, his calloused thumb gently brushing a stray lock of raven hair behind her ear. His control was slipping, the adrenaline of the impending war tearing down his walls. I am only terrified of losing the people I care about. I couldn't save my father. I will not lose my brother. He paused, his heavy silver gaze dropping to her lips. And I will not lose you. Audrey's breath hitched. She had spent 2 years maintaining strict boundaries, denying the magnetic, dangerous pull between them. But tonight, surrounded by the looming threat of death, those boundaries completely crumbled. She reached up, her hands tangling in his dark hair, and pulled him down to her. The kiss was desperate, fierce, and tasting of expensive scotch and unsaid promises. Cassius wrapped his strong arms around her waist, lifting her effortlessly onto the marble counter, his mouth devouring hers with a possessive hunger he had restrained for far too long. He poured all his suppressed fear, rage, and secret devotion into the embrace, anchoring himself to her light in the middle of his darkness. Suddenly, Cassius's encrypted burner phone vibrated aggressively in his pocket, shattering the intimate moment. He pulled back, his chest heaving, his forehead resting gently against hers. I have to take this. Audrey nodded, her cheeks flushed, her eyes heavy with affection and dread. Go. Win your war. Cassius stepped away, pulling the phone to his ear. Speak. Damien's voice crackled through the speaker, breathless, frantic, and accompanied by the deafening sound of automatic gunfire. Boss. It's a trap. The shipping ports were completely empty. Declan knew we were coming. A cold, horrifying realization washed over Cassius. The firebombing at the diner wasn't just a message. It was a calculated distraction. Declan Callahan didn't just know about Liam. He knew Cassius's exact retaliatory playbook. Damien, get your men out of there now, Cassius roared, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. We're pinned down, boss. They rigged the containers with C4. We need backup. A massive explosion echoed through the line, followed instantly by dead, static air. Cassius crushed the phone in his grip, his eyes darkening with absolute, terrifying fury. Someone inside his own inner circle had betrayed him. There was a mole in the Sterling Syndicate, and they had just handed Declan Callahan the keys to the kingdom. Hard karma was indeed coming, but Cassius swore on his father's grave that the traitor and Declan would pay the ultimate price in unimaginable agony. Deafening silence replaced the chaotic, violent static on the encrypted burner phone, heavy and suffocating in the sudden quiet of the grand kitchen. Cassius stood rigidly by the marble island, the sharp, broken plastic of the crushed device cutting deep into his palm. He didn't feel the pain. An icy, razor-sharp rush of adrenaline flooded his system, instantly eradicating any lingering warmth from the tender moment he had just shared with Audrey. The man who had kissed her seconds ago, the vulnerable, exhausted brother seeking solace, vanished. In his place stood the apex predator of the Sterling Syndicate, a warlord who had just realized his impenetrable fortress had been breached from the inside. He turned to Audrey. His slate-gray eyes were entirely devoid of humanity, replaced by a calculating, terrifyingly blank stare that had condemned dozens of men to death. "Stay here," Cassius commanded. His voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried the crushing weight of an absolute decree. He reached behind his tailored suit jacket, smoothly drawing a spare, fully loaded Glock 19 from the small of his back. He stepped forward and pressed the cold, heavy metal into her trembling hands. Audrey gripped the weapon instinctively, her medical training acting as a dam against the rising tide of panic. She looked at his face, seeing the tectonic shift in his demeanor. "Cassius, what happened? Was it Damien?" "Silas," Cassius said, the name tasting like sour ash and venom on his tongue. Only 3 people in the entire world knew the exact coordinates of the port raid tonight. Me, Damien, and Silas. Silas took those surveillance photos of my father 15 years ago. He's been in the inner circle for a decade, playing the longest game imaginable. He's been waiting for the perfect moment to sell us out to the Callahans. He didn't wait for her to process the catastrophic betrayal. Cassius backed away. His eyes locked on hers one last time. "Lock the steel doors. Engage the magnetic seals. Do not open them for anyone except me or Damien. If anyone else tries to enter, shoot to kill. Do you understand me? Anyone." Audrey swallowed hard, her emerald eyes flashing with grim understanding, and nodded. Without another word, Cassius sprinted out of the kitchen. Behind him, the heavy, reinforced steel doors hissed shut, the heavy deadbolt sliding into place with a definitive, echoing thud. He moved like a phantom through the shadowy, opulent hallways of the Milton estate, heading straight for the underground bunker. The mansion was eerily quiet, the storm raging outside muffled by bulletproof glass. As he descended the hidden, winding concrete stairs, his mind calculated the logistics of the betrayal with terrifying, machine-like speed. Silas was ambitious, Cassius had always known that, had even rewarded it. But to align with Declan Callahan, Silas wanted the Sterling throne, and Declan wanted Arthur's bastard son dead to wipe out the bloodline. It was a mutually beneficial, sickening alliance forged in pure treachery. Cassius reached the bottom of the stairwell, his footsteps completely masked by the thick rubber soles of his tactical boots. The heavy, blast-proof vault door to the war room was slightly ajar, spilling a thin slice of pale, fluorescent light into the corridor. Pushing it open an inch further with the matte black barrel of his primary weapon, Cassius stepped silently inside. The room smelled faintly of ozone and burning paper. Silas was standing by the primary safe, his back turned, frantically stuffing thick stacks of untraceable bearer bonds, stacks of $100 bills, and encrypted hard drives into a massive black duffel bag. His movements were jerky, fueled by nervous sweat and the desperate rush of a thief in the night. "Going somewhere, Silas?" Cassius asked, his tone deceptively conversational, drifting through the cold concrete room like a winter chill. Silas froze. The heavy duffel bag slipped from his grasp, hitting the floor with a dull thud. He turned around slowly, his hands raised in a mock, theatrical gesture of surrender. His young, sharply angled face was pale, glistening with sweat under the harsh lights, but an arrogant, twitching smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Cassius," Silas breathed, trying to steady his voice. "I was just securing the liquid assets. In case Damien's failure at the docks brings the police or the heat back to the estate, we need to be ready to move." "Damien didn't fail," Cassius replied. He stepped fully into the light, keeping his gun leveled directly at the center of Silas's chest, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. He walked into a slaughterhouse. A trap you set. You tipped off Declan. You traded the lives of my best men for a seat at the Callahan table. The false innocence melted off Silas's face, replaced by a sneer of pure, unfiltered resentment. He dropped his hands, no longer pretending. Your father was weak, Cassius. Silas spat, his voice echoing shrilly in the bunker. He let a civilian nurse distract him, and it got him gutted in an alleyway. And you? You're just as weak. You brought that pathetic street rat into our home today. You're letting a disgraced doctor soften your edge. The syndicate needs a ruthless, visionary leader, not a sentimental fool playing house. Cassius didn't blink. The gun in his hand remained perfectly still. You think Declan Callahan will share Boston with a traitor? He respects loyalty above all else. He'll use your intel, let you burn my house down, and put a bullet in your head the second you outlive your usefulness. Declan isn't going to share, Silas laughed darkly, a manic, breathless glint dancing in his eyes. He's taking it all. Tonight. You think the port was the actual target? It was a diversion, Cassius. A bloody piece of meat thrown to draw your best men and your heavy artillery away from the estate. Silas purposefully checked his gold Rolex, his smirk widening into a sinister, triumphant grin. Right about now, a massive, earth-shaking explosion violently rocked the very foundation of the mansion. The shockwave hit the bunker a fraction of a second later, throwing Cassius slightly off balance. Dust and loose concrete rained down heavily from the ceiling. The main fluorescent lights shattered and died, instantly plunging the room into darkness before the emergency backup generators kicked in, bathing the war room in a sinister, pulsing, blood-red hue. The front gates just went down. Silas sneered over the ringing in their ears, stepping backward toward the heavy mahogany desk. Declan is here, Cassius. His entire army is on the lawn. The Sterling era is over. Believing the explosion had distracted his boss, Silas lunged desperately for a hidden compartment beneath the desk, his hand closing around the grip of a hidden revolver. But Cassius's reflexes were forged in the unforgiving fires of pure survival. He didn't hesitate. He didn't flinch. He pulled the trigger twice in rapid succession. The deafening, twin cracks of the handgun echoed brutally in the confined concrete space. The hollow point rounds took Silas dead in the center of his chest, the kinetic force lifting him off his feet and throwing him backward. He crashed against the wall and slid to the floor, his chest completely ruined, his treacherous, grand ambitions dying with him on the cold, dusty linoleum. Cassius lowered his weapon, stepping over the bleeding corpse without a second glance. His jaw was clenched so tight his teeth ached. Silas was dead, a minor problem eradicated, but the true nightmare had just violently arrived on his doorstep. The muffled, rhythmic popping of automatic gunfire began echoing from the floors above. He had to get to the east wing. He had to get to Audrey and Liam. Shattered crystal from the grand chandelier rained down upon the imported Italian marble foyer, crunching beneath Cassius's heavy combat boots as he took the main staircase 2 steps at a time. The air in the Milton estate was thick with the acrid stench of cordite, burning plaster, and copper. The deafening, staccato rhythm of automatic gunfire echoed relentlessly through the sprawling, vaulted hallways. Declan Callahan's strike team had breached the outer perimeter with terrifying efficiency, their tactical boots tearing through the elegant, historic home, ruthlessly executing any remaining security guards who dared to stand in their path. Cassius moved not like a man, but like a shadow forged in hellfire. He was a reaper in a bespoke suit, his face a mask of cold, calculating fury. He ruthlessly eliminated 2 Callahan mercenaries in the West Corridor with precise, lethal double taps to the chest, not even breaking his stride as their bodies hit the plush carpet. He had one singular, agonizing focus: the East Wing, the secure kitchen. Audrey and Liam. He reached the entrance to the East Wing just as a fire team of 4 heavily armed men began frantically molding plastic explosives onto the reinforced steel doors of the kitchen. They were trying to blow the lock. "Hey!" Cassius roared, his voice a primal, terrifying sound that reverberated off the paneled walls. He stepped out from behind a shattered marble pillar, exposing himself to the firing line. Before the mercenaries could fully pivot and raise their heavy assault rifles, Cassius unloaded his clip. His aim was flawless, driven by a decade of street warfare and a desperate, clawing need to protect his blood. He dropped 3 of the men instantly, their armor useless against the close-range, high-caliber rounds. The remaining mercenaries scrambled frantically for cover behind a heavy oak credenza, returning blind fire that shredded the priceless artwork and pulverized the drywall inches from Cassius's head. Plaster dust plumed into the air like smoke. Cassius ejected his spent magazine, slammed a fresh one home, and aggressively pushed forward. He didn't wait for the man to reload. He vaulted the credenza and eliminated the final threat in a brutal, efficient display of close-quarters combat. Panting, his knuckles bruised and bleeding, Cassius slammed his hand against the manual override panel for the kitchen doors. Suddenly, a massive, concussive blast originated from inside the kitchen. The thick steel doors violently shuddered, groaning on their heavy hinges. Panic, raw, unfiltered, and entirely alien to the syndicate boss, seized Cassius's heart with an icy grip. They hadn't needed to blow the doors from the hallway. Someone had breached the room from the underground service elevator. The heavy steel doors hissed and slid open, retreating into the walls to reveal a tableau that made the blood in Cassius's veins freeze solid. Declan Callahan stood squarely in the center of the expansive, ruined kitchen. The older mob boss was a hulking figure, his face heavily scarred and weathered, his pale eyes carrying the dark, suffocating weight of decades of ruthless, remorseless murder. In his massive, calloused hand, he held Audrey firmly by the throat. He had a heavy, polished silver, 357 Magnum revolver pressed sickeningly tight against her temple. Audrey's face was bruised, her lips split and bleeding, but she wasn't crying. Her emerald eyes burned with a furious, unyielding defiance, locking onto Cassius the moment the doors parted. Even with a gun to her head, she was assessing the tactical situation, her medical training keeping her breathing steady, refusing to give Declan the satisfaction of her fear. Across the shattered marble of the kitchen island stood Liam. The young boy held Cassius's spare Glock, 19 inches, a two-handed grip. His thin arms were trembling violently, his knuckles white, but the barrel was aimed squarely at Declan's broad chest. A shattered, sparking light fixture swinging wildly above them revealed that Liam had already fired a warning shot. A massive hole was blown through the custom cabinetry just inches from Declan's head. Well, Declan chuckled, a wet, rattling sound. His thick, gravelly Irish accent grated against the excruciating tension in the room. The bastard son has some teeth, after all. And here is the great king of Boston, arriving just in time to watch his entire empire turn to ash. Cassius slowly raised his weapon, his arms locked and steady, aiming the tritium sights directly between Declan's pale eyes. The world tunneled until nothing existed but the older man's skull. Let her go, Declan. This is between you and me. It always has been. This is about Arthur, Declan roared, the arrogant composure snapping like a dry twig. Spittle flew from his lips. Your father humiliated my family. He took our territory. He crippled my brothers. And he thought he could hide his dirty little secrets in a rundown apartment across town. I killed him for his arrogance. And now, I am going to end his bloodline. I'm going to kill his bastard, his doctor, and his precious heir. Declan's thumb pulled back the heavy hammer of the revolver. The mechanical click echoed like a cannon shot in the silent room. Liam, shoot, Audrey screamed, her voice tearing through the kitchen, absolutely refusing to be the reason Cassius surrendered. She thrashed against Declan's grip, trying to throw off his aim. Annoyed by her resistance, Declan shifted his massive arm, pulling the gun millimeters away from her temple to viciously backhand her across the face. It was a fatal miscalculation. In that split, agonizing second, Liam didn't freeze. The street rat who had survived Boston's harshest winters, the boy who had been beaten and starved, tapped into the deeply buried, terrifyingly cold Sterling instinct. He pulled the trigger. The deafening crack of the 9mm shattered the standoff. The shot wasn't a perfect kill. Liam's hands were shaking too hard, but the hollow point round tore through Declan's meaty right shoulder, shattering the collarbone. Declan roared in sudden, blinding agony, his iron grip on Audrey faltering completely. She dropped to the floor, gasping for air. Cassius moved with terrifying, explosive speed. He didn't fire his own gun, calculating the horrific risk of a ricochet hitting Audrey on the granite floor as too high. Instead, he closed the 20-foot distance in a heartbeat, tackling the towering, older mob boss directly to the unyielding ground. The Magnum revolver fired wildly as they fell, the massive caliber round blowing a hole through the ceiling. The two titans of Boston's underworld clashed in a brutal, breathless hand-to-hand death match amidst the broken glass and spilled wine. Declan was immensely strong, fueled by decades of festering hatred and adrenaline, but Cassius was a man possessed. He was fighting for his family. Declan swung a tree trunk leg, catching Cassius in the ribs with a sickening crunch. But Cassius didn't even flinch. He managed to pin Declan's gun arm down with his knee, trapping the revolver against the floor. With his free hand, Cassius delivered a series of devastating, bone-shattering strikes directly to Declan's face. "This is for my father," Cassius snarled, his knuckles connecting with Declan's jaw, fracturing it instantly. He raised his fist again, his eyes dark and merciless. "And this is for my brother." With a final, lethal twist of his body, Cassius wrenched Declan's wrist until the bones snapped, completely disarming him. He jammed the barrel of his own Glock directly against the center of the Callahan leader's chest, right over his heart. He pulled the trigger twice. The twin retorts were deafening, ending the bitter, 15-year war in a single, bloody heartbeat. Declan Callahan's body went rigid, then slack, his pale eyes staring sightlessly up at the ruined ceiling. Silence, heavy, ringing, and utterly suffocating, finally descended upon the devastated kitchen. Cassius remained kneeling over the body for a long moment, his chest heaving, listening to the ringing in his ears. Slowly, he stood up, holstering his weapon and wiping a thick streak of Declan's blood from his sharp jawline. He turned his head. He looked over at Liam. The young boy had dropped the gun, staring in absolute, wide-eyed shock at the gruesome violence he had just participated in. He was leaning against the counter, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. Then, Cassius looked down at Audrey. She was sitting on the floor, leaning back against the shattered island, coughing violently and holding her bruised throat, but she was looking right back at him. She was alive. Cassius crossed the room, the adrenaline leaving him in a rushing wave, replaced by an overwhelming, desperate need. He dropped to his knees beside Audrey and pulled her into a crushing, desperate embrace, burying his face deep in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of her hair underneath the smoke. She wrapped her arms tightly around his broad shoulders, holding him just as fiercely. After a long moment, Cassius reached out his other arm, beckoning his brother. Liam stumbled forward, and Cassius pulled the trembling boy down into the tight hold. Surrounded by the smoldering wreckage of his impenetrable fortress, kneeling in the blood of his greatest enemy, Cassius Sterling finally realized the truth. His empire had never been built on money, fear, or territorial control. It was built right here, in the ashes of the past, with the fragile, beautiful family he had fought so desperately to protect. Months later, the Boston skyline gleamed under a clear spring sky. The Sterling Syndicate had transformed, leaving behind the senseless violence of the past to establish a legitimate corporate empire. Cassius stood by the massive windows of his high-rise office, the heavy silver medallion resting securely against his chest. He turned as the mahogany doors opened. Audrey stepped inside, her brilliant smile illuminating the room, no longer just his doctor, but his partner in every sense of the word. Close behind her was Liam, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, looking every bit the confident Sterling heir as he reviewed legal documents for their new charitable foundation. The war had cost them dearly, but it had ultimately forged an unbreakable bond. The shadows of their past had been eradicated, replaced by a fiercely protected future.